It's a huge pleasure to be joined by Anna Danylchuk once again. As many of you know, she's been creating a war diary since the early days of the full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022. She tells the truth about Russia's invasion of Ukraine and the motivations behind it. She cuts through the noise and the propaganda. And we're going to have, I think, an especially laser-like focus in today's episode on these issues because we're in the fourth year of the war. And rather than tapering down or showing signs of ending, Russia's aggression is only intensifying and Western weakness is more apparent than ever. Before we jump into this, thank you to everybody who supports Anna and the growth of her channel and her loyal audience. And thank you to everyone else who supports Silicon Curtain, especially through Patreon or Buy Me a Coffee. It is incredibly important at this time, especially as focus moves once again, unfortunately, to the Middle East. We need to really double down and make sure that Ukraine remains top of the headlines. Anna, welcome back.
Thank you so much, Jonathan, for having me, and warm greetings to all the Silicon Curtain community.
Well, we're getting a sense of deja vu, aren't we? Because when October 7th happened and a huge terrorist operation was launched against Israel, we saw a massive drop off in focus on Ukraine. To an extent, we've been fighting since then to regain news headlines, regain people's attention on what is actually the greatest threat to world peace. It is, yes, the Middle East is a mess, but actually Russia and its rewriting of the global order or rule of law order, and particularly that is apparent in its invasion of Ukraine. That to me is still the greatest existential threat to an orderly and prosperous world. I'm sure you'd agree, but do you also fear this sort of sucking of the media oxygen out by what's happening in the Middle East?
To tell you the truth, I am not afraid of that, but I am afraid of the fact that people cannot comprehend, cannot analyze bigger pictures. Maybe it's partially the fault of the social media. Maybe it's this dynamic times we live in, but people simply consume news as like separate events, totally unconnected. And that is why it's so easy to distort their attention and to make them believe that, let's say, events that unfold in the Middle East are more important or more dangerous for their personal life or something. When in reality, all of them are super connected. We may say this is already this hybrid cell world war unfolding. When I have come across so many questions about Iran and its nuclear program, and many Western observers kept saying, how come Iran, a country without this developed research institutions, without wealth, was able to develop the nuclear program? And others said, like, have a look at the North Korea regime. They have nuclear weapons and nobody touches them, no matter how crazy they are. So it's important to possess these nuclear weapons, but how did they develop? Don't you know the answer? Russia is to blame. Russia provides these regimes with whom Russia openly cooperates, signs agreements on mutual support. North Korean soldiers work on on Iranian Shahed factories in Russia. They do it openly. They show it to you in their news. They speak about that. And you choose not to notice that and to treat each of the events as something separate, something different, something totally unconnected to the Russian war in Ukraine.
We're seeing evidence as well. I mean, there's two interesting stories that I want to sort of cover in a bit more detail on my news episodes. But firstly, Zelensky and his sort of military intelligence team say they are finding evidence that Russia is making preparations. We don't know how advanced those preparations are, but making preparations not just to continue attacks in Ukraine, but to potentially assault countries in Europe. And this isn't a sub-threshold or sub-Article 5 incursion. This is full invasion plans. So that's, we've been saying this for a long time, but I think there's a degree of skepticism in many quarters about it. It's interesting that Zelensky's talking about that. But we're also hearing from Sierski that Russian operations are advancing along all lines of the front. So rather than, pulling back or restraining its resources, it seems that Russia is throwing a lot into trying to make incremental advances. At the same time, we see the terror unfolding in Kiev. Well, let's tackle those first things, the first two issues, and then, of course, we'll talk about I would say, the increased aggression and capability to project aggression that Russia's developing through Shaheeds and its production lines that are definitely scaling up.
Well, everybody sees that the number of attacks grew exponentially since Donald Trump is in the office and names this process not an escalation from the Russian side, but the negotiations process. And as a Ukrainian, I feel very humiliated that others, leaders who see how incompetent and irrelevant Trump is in this situation, being totally supportive of the Kremlin regime, boasting that the bloodiest war criminal responsible for the deaths of hundreds of Ukrainian children congratulated him with best day. Something is very wrong with the world when people boast such things like Hitler congratulated, now Putin congratulating. And it's not just a moral bankruptcy, it's just like some worse than that, because bankruptcy brings you to nothing and it's worse. And the number of Russian terrorist attacks on sleeping people in their homes, just as we record this video, 7 killed in attack on Kyiv, 28 during one night the previous week. And the world thinks that, well, negotiations, we should not, interfere because they are happening. What kind of the negotiations that is? Would you name 9/11 a form of the negotiations? Definitely not. And these double standards, they will not bring lasting peace, not just to Ukraine, but to the world. If we see this weakness of the Western leaders as ordinary people, as YouTubers, don't you think that the Russian intelligence, that the Russian war criminals understand that as the perfect moment to break the NATO, to get more territories for themselves? And of course, the war continues on the front lines. The terror continues in many Ukrainian cities, not just Kyiv. For example, 2 weeks ago, a young couple was killed in my very safe Ukrainian city after the attack on the apartment building that collapsed. They lived on the 8th floor, and their dead bodies were found in the cellar. They flew all the way down. This happened in my native city. My morning begins with writing messages to my Kyiv relatives asking if they survived. This happens like twice, 3 times a week. That's what I live in. And you consider me like a normal, ordinary person. Do you think normal, ordinary person should go through this while the leaders of the democratic world do not want to disappoint Trump, do not want to speak about Ukraine during the NATO summit that is coming? Not to disappoint a 79-year inadequate, very ignorant, very narcissistic person that won't be here in 20 years. But the consequences of what he and those who appease Putin do, the consequences will be felt for the many, many, many generations of the Europeans and Americans. And that's a tragedy. And if you ask me, do I believe that Russia can attack a NATO country in the years or actually months to come? I will say yes, 100% yes. When I started my videos and I spoke about this potential development of the war, it was more of a warning, more of some emotions speaking in me. But right now, I say yes, based on my observations, experience, and the intelligence information that so many of us share. Not just Ukrainian intelligence, though I believe it's one of the best right now. Let's be realistic. and the Ukrainian army and the Ukrainian leadership. Sometimes I do have this feeling that we are the only adults on the planet. Honestly, sorry, maybe it sounds a little bit arrogant, but we kind of keep fighting against so many nuclear countries that keep attacking or betraying us right now. And we are determined to do the job contrary to what those who promised us. Budapest Memorandum disappeared from the website of the White House. Is that a sign of weakness? Isn't that a green light for Putin to continue? Have you heard how Donald Trump commented on the very complex situation in the Baltic region, even though it's NATO? I am sure the United States will not fight for the Baltic countries. Ukraine will. And that is why more and more politicians of the countries who truly support Ukraine, but who also truly realize the dangers that Russia imposes, speak not about NATO security guarantees, but Ukraine security guarantees. NATO lives by the past, believing in its untested, by the way, in real big European wars, experiences and skills. There are some things they possess, but there are also lots of things they lack. And by constantly betreating Ukraine to please Putin, they create the great mistake that can actually lead to the collapse of the alliance. And it may seem like something unbelievable, but the Second World War demonstrated how many of the post First World War organizations failed to prevent the second, actually.
And it seems I've been saying this. I was criticized actually for what was said to be going too far, and this is more than a year ago, that NATO has become little more than a zombie organization. And then Mark Rutte was appointed as its um, general secretary. And it was said at the time that, he's incredibly diplomatic. He's able to speak to all sorts of people. He's able to get deals, etc. It seems to me at this point that NATO has become exactly that hollow zombie organization. And Mark Rutte's main job is to convince people that it's still real, that it's still living, that it's still powerful. But it has done nothing for Ukraine in a very long time. Um, but it also, the very fact that it still exists as this sort of zombie institution prevents other countries from creating ad hoc alliances, from waking up and doing things, because they're still able to hide behind that facade of the organization, that sort of bureaucratic pretense that it's still powerful. When Ukraine is admitted into NATO, there may be no NATO, where it may be such an absurd concept that a strong Ukraine, with its experience, its huge number of people who were civilians but who have gained military experience, it would become an utter absurdity for Ukraine to join NATO, or even at that point for NATO to join Ukraine.
Thank you for that. Yeah, as a Ukrainian, with great respect to the countries that support Ukraine, to the countries that shared their skills, that shared their weapons, that shared their intelligence with Ukraine, I have to thank NATO because, like a lot of the things that these countries possess, are actually because they were members of NATO for decades. So this is how it works. But if we speak about the institution itself and the way it reacts to the challenges, actually for which it was designed, it's pathetic. It's super weak. It's very unrealistic. And every Ukrainian will tell you that if Ukraine and Georgia were admitted to NATO in 2008, on this Bucharest summit, where the administration of George Bush, who was still then a president, not Obama became later, was in April, and Merkel persuaded that it's not the right time. It happened in April 2008. And in August 2008, Russia attacked Georgia, like less than 5 months ago, because it was a clear signal from NATO. No, Putin has a veto right inside the alliance. That's exactly what we observe. Putin has veto in NATO. If a country that is outside NATO, if a country that undermines the world order, does not fight its wars according to the rules of wars, has a veto right inside NATO. Do you think it is working then? I think no. I think no. And with all due respect, I keep speaking about the admission of Ukraine and how Ukraine needs NATO and NATO needs Ukraine. But with each weakness, with each indecisiveness, with each betrayal, that we see, but the Kremlin also sees. The Kremlin also sees that as an invitation to continue, let's say, to other areas that maybe maybe are now NATO. Putin now speaks about the need to reverse NATO borders to 1997, which means Baltic South. And Trump will say, yes, they were once Soviet Union, so maybe they should not be in NATO. And this is how he undermines and breaks the alliance, demonstrating this weakness, demonstrating this inadequate analysis of the situation. Like the years of its work made it too relaxed or what, I don't know. And as a realist, as a person that knows what war is, unfortunately, I do have this feeling that when we win this war, NATO may be already irrelevant.
Question then comes up, what replaces it? And of course, before we hit record, we were talking about things like Joint Expeditionary Force and so on. But it also seems that individual countries are not living up to their promise. And I think this is going to be hard to get you to talk about this because it's painful. It's incredibly painful. You had Western leaders in Kiev not long ago talking about if Putin does not comply, if Putin does not start winding down his invasion, massive sanctions, massive consequences will be in store. Well, that period has elapsed, and we've heard little to nothing more about that. Um, at the same time, Putin is scaling up his attacks from being, a couple of hundred shaheeds on a particular anniversary or a particular significant date to the dictator. You're now seeing 300 to 400 shaheeds every single night. And with the scaling up of production, that looks like it's going to get towards 1,000 in a couple of months' time. That's certainly their intention, and it seems that their actions with their allies, North Korea, is to try and put in place that kind of capability. Um, how disappointed are Ukrainians in European leaders, including Starmer, including Merz, including Macron, whose words continue to be strong, but whose actions in the face of not just Putin, but also Trump exude extreme weakness?
We are very disappointed, and trust me, we see that because when every night you have to do your best to survive, and you wake up after sleeping an hour, you go to work and you read the news, or people keep saying similar phrases and threatening. Of course, you feel very disappointed. Of course, you feel betrayed. And you also feel very concerned about the future of these people because our weakness, our indecisiveness, our betrayals, they always return back. And I do not understand why they don't see that this kind of weakness will cost them a lot in future. Not because of Ukraine, but because of Russia, because of Iran, because of China, because of North Korea. Everybody knows that China gives Russia money and opportunities and details, everything to continue this war. Without the support of China, Russia would definitely fail. Everybody knows that Iran shared their drone technologies and helped Russians develop Shahed drone factories on the territory of Russia. So strikes on Iran do not change the situation that tremendously as many hope. We also know that very likely Russia provided Iran regime with the skills and information needed for the construction of the nuclear weapons. North Korean soldiers are fighting on the front lines for Russia, thousands of them. Now, thousands of North Korean soldiers, like 20, will come to work on Russian military factories because of Ukraine's precise strike on military factories. Not many Russian volunteers to work there, so North Koreans are coming to do the job. Do Starmer, Macron, Meloni know about this? Yes, I think they know more than I do. So they clearly see how this axis of evil is helping Russia getting stronger, exchanging information, satellite images, people, boots on the ground. Do you remember how Starmer promised boots on the ground? And we have boots on the ground, but from North Korea, not from elsewhere. And the thing is that somehow these authoritarian regimes are prepared to back up Russia. I don't know why. They also prepared to get this valuable experience. I don't know what for. And I'm not mentioning like Budapest Memorandum. I'm not mentioning the fact that Ukraine simply defends itself. I'm not mentioning that we kind of have similar values and that just like letting Ukraine down is also your failure too. But uh, Putin understands he cannot conquer Ukraine. Ukraine is more stronger and more decisive than the majority of the European and American leaders. We keep fighting. So they switched to the terror tactic because by attacking sleeping people in their homes, you do not achieve anything but this terror, death, and fear. So right now, Putin understands that Ukraine will not give up. The West will not punish Russia. So Russia is to do what it wants. These negotiations, they do not last. There are no negotiations. Actually, it is Putin targeting sleeping, killing children in their beds, and Trump giving him an opportunity to do so, protecting him from new sanctions imposed, protecting him from any problems because we can, like right now, because of this inadequacy of Trump. And oh my God, I'm sorry, American people, but that was the worst period, the worst timing to choose such a person to be your president, to represent the will of you. And somehow more adequate, more understanding European leaders switched to satisfy Trump. And I'm sure they do understand that there are no negotiations, that Russia simply terrorizes Ukraine. And like right now, everybody is waiting when the will of Ukrainian people will break and we will surrender. That's the strategy right now. And I believe that a lot of the so-called leaders are angry that, oh, we do not want to surrender because they would. Trump would surrender if he was Zelensky. But we know what life under Russia is. We know what people experience on these temporarily occupied territories. And we also know that if Ukraine falls, people like me are killed, others escape, those who will stay will be conscripted, like in Luhansk and Donetsk or Crimea, and sent to Poland, the Baltics, and elsewhere. We know that. So by standing against Russia, we actually stand against this global war that is happening because of Russia's support for Iran, North Korea. They show it to you. They show it on the news, and you people pretend not to see. This will have tremendously negative consequences for your societies too. And I believe that Putin had plans to attack maybe some former Soviet republics that are now NATO countries. I'm sure he had this plan for 5, 10 years. But now, seeing how weak everyone is, how Donald Trump brought this chaos into a more or less weak but still united strategy, uh, he understands that in a year or 2 or 3, he won't have such a perfect moment. He won't have such a guardian in the White House. So he will use this opportunity. Trust me, I'm Ukrainian. He will use this opportunity of tremendous weakness and very open betrayal, not just of the Ukrainian people, but of this Western values, alliances, and what we all still call democracy.
And we can see that, I think. We see Iran taking advantage of it. We see North Korea taking advantage of it. We see China potentially, well, not potentially, China has been taking advantage of it. It may go still further with Taiwan. We see Israel taking advantage of it. I think one of the reasons why Netanyahu has moved with his intelligence operations, moved on Gaza, is not just because of the terrorist attacks, but because he almost certainly feels that Trump is easier to manipulate than it would be, a different US administration. So we see people all over the world, leaders taking advantage of this moment of weakness.
Mm.
The only country that
Yes.
has to rely on its own wits and its own innovation and its own material and I don't want to say spirit because we talked about that, and it's not fair to um, turn Ukrainians into saints. They shouldn't be
Mm.
suffering in this way. Their cities should not be targeted. They shouldn't have to fight for basic values. But it seems that only Ukraine um, has no interest in using Trump's time in office, but is at the wrong end of that, is suffering because we have incredible weakness in the White House.
Yes. Like constant tackle moments. And, I was trying to see, like, first of all, I have stopped following Trump's messages. That's what I did at the beginning. Trump, Elon Musk, this constant conspiracy series that they were spreading, repetition of the Russian propaganda narratives. It made me feel so emotional, so like disgusted, like making things worse. Like after a night of Shahed drones attacking you, you then have to think about this BS said by people who are the main representatives of the main democracy in the world once. And it was so like toxic for my heart, for my soul, for my brain. And then I've realized that like Trump constantly contradicts himself. And someone from his close circle during the previous term made a very important conclusion that Trump chickens out when he needs to make an irreversible decision, that he simply cannot make an irreversible decision. And that is why he's constantly saying about these 2 weeks, or he says, we will not strike, or we are not at war with Iran, but with Iran nuclear programs. And then they want regime change. This is just like a mess. This person contradicts himself like 10 times during the day. 10 times during the day. And I have, with all the like, he has a lot of power, unfortunately, and the consequences of his decisions can be deadly for a lot of us. But I cannot take him seriously. And I feel betrayed when those smarter leaders see the same things I do, but keep playing by Trump's rules, hoping that what? Hoping that what? Do you really like, do you people in Europe choose Trump as your commander in chief too? Are you serious about that? This is what makes me feel very sick.
And we're seeing the horror increasing. Putin is building a capability which I fear could be unleashed on European cities as well. At this point, he hasn't broken Ukraine, and Ukraine is a barrier between his malignant aggression and European countries, whether they realize it or not, whether they're grateful for it or not. But I fear that his plan is to preserve his regime and do whatever it takes to do that. The same could be said for Iran. To an extent, Netanyahu in Israel is similar. As long as he is committing aggressive acts, then that prolongs their regime. Whereas Zelensky is doing a different job, it seems to me. He's doing the job of a leader. He's speaking certain truths and he is surviving only insofar his nation can actually survive. I think there's a slightly different thing. The other leaders are sacrificing their nations for their own survival. Zelensky is entirely dependent on the survival of Ukraine for him to stay in office. And there's almost a symbiotic thing there. But it's also clear that it seems to me the US administration is starting to attack Zelensky again, and it's starting to attack people around Zelensky. And this hasn't got much attention, but it seems to me that the US administration is minded to try and undermine Ukraine to the benefit of Russia. That sounds paranoid, but do you see signs of that taking place? You may say to me that this is absolutely obvious. Why do we even ask such a basic question? But what's your sense there?
Well, I think that's obvious why I ask such a question. It all began after this ambush in the Oval Office, which actually failed and ruined a bit of Trump's support. It went unexpectedly. And um, but I think it's not the first time that the United States were sending delegations to look for the substitutes for Zelensky. Why do they want it? Because they think that by substituting Zelensky, they can bring someone who will surrender to Russia, who will simply agree the terms that Russia pushes through the support of the White House, because they cannot break the spirit of the Ukrainian people. I'm sure they did not know about the spider web operation, and they are afraid that Ukraine can actually defeat Russia. And unfortunately, right now, the White House, not the American people, the White House is on the side of the Kremlin because Trump adores Putin. He's in love. I think that Putin understands that, and he even like that. Um, He's playing with Trump. Trump is ready to do anything to simply meet with Putin, which is insane because it's just like dreaming to meet Hitler. But Trump openly speaks about that. He boasts on his social media that he spoke with Putin, that Putin complimented him, that Putin respects him, that Putin congratulated him. Can you imagine, like, I don't know, me boasting about some maniac or terrorist complimenting me? No, but somehow the world would be very judgmental to me or you. Lots of people would unsubscribe if we would say something like that. But people, Macron, Starmer, uh, Mert, they allow Donald Trump to say this BS. I'm actually happy that there were some strong answers during G7, and that might be the reason why uh, Trump escaped.
I think that's why he
That
ran away. I think Mertz
Yeah, well,
apparently said
Mert
we don't
said
invite killers
that
to this
we we
forum.
yes, that was a good moment. I hope more to come. I hope we are like the only way to survive for all the Western civilization is for people to see and start acting correspondingly. Donald Trump is weak. Donald Trump stands for Putin. Donald Trump does not understand what he's doing. He's not able to think about past. He's not able to project the future. He only lives in the present, and in that present, he wants to be glorified by Kim Jong-un, Putin, and Xi Jinping. These are four people with whom he is prepared to negotiate and make deals. And they all laugh at him. That's 100%.
The last area, and this is just sort of slightly tangential because it's been a fairly, grim theme up until now, and rightly so, because what's happening is shocking, appalling, disgraceful. But we also met recently at the Lviv Media Forum, and that gave me some sort of small hope. Again, I don't want to talk about resilience or will in an abstract concept, but here we had something very, very specific, which is the cream of Ukrainian journalism coming together with many international guests and putting on an event which was absolutely world class. Superb organization in a fabulous location, a new tech center. So again, that's a symbol of what Ukraine could be if it was left in peace to follow, a rule of law development, a democratic development, which is the path on which Ukraine is committed to. And I think that gave a glimpse of what, it's the future that Ukraine is building in the most terrible circumstances. It's a future that people are already able to kind of construct. And of course, if Ukraine was able to liberate its territories and have peace and security, one can imagine, extrapolate out from that, what that might look like over the whole country. And it's extraordinary, and it would be, and it will be extraordinary.
Thank you. As you were saying this, I recollected the first part of your previous question about Zelensky, understanding that his career is closely connected with the survival of the country. Um, you know, one of the things that makes it easier for me to trust my government, to trust my people, is the fact that I do know he's fighting and he's protecting and he's caring and he's aging, and not because of his career prospects. I'm not saying he was always like that, but war changes a lot in the way you see, in the way you feel. And I keep repeating that to my viewers, and I write about that, that your love for your country is real. Maybe you're lucky enough to live far away from the war zones, and you do not question that. You do not test your feelings for your country, but they are very real. And I say can be compared not just to this high spiritual, moral love, but also to the physical one. When you want to sleep in your bed, when you want to smell blooming trees on your street, when you want to meet your classmates after 25 years after school in your school building, not destroyed. When we don't speak about that, but missiles target even graveyards in Ukraine, schools and hospitals. And you develop this physical dependency and love and pain of what happens to your country. And Zelensky witnessed a lot of things. He felt a lot of things. He spoke with a lot of families. He knows the depth of this sorrow. So having heart, and he has one, uh, does not make it about work or career. Of course, we all love to be successful. That's a part of strong people with leadership, and he is the one. But it's about like the survival of your home, protecting your home. They also target Kryvyi his hometown, very often just because he's from that city, just because like every Ukrainian is a target. So that is why, if it's true, if it's real, everyone knows that and feels that in Ukraine. And that's why all of these hysterics coming from the White House that only reveal more and more narcissism, more and more weakness, more and more, I don't know, this orange disgust, they don't work here. And they fail and they keep failing. And more people see how they keep failing in everything they do. Donald Trump came to the White House as the president of peace, right? And he just bombed Iran. I'm not saying it's wrong, but it's contrary to what he promised to his people. And there are millions of things that reveal this incompetence, this weakness. And to some extent, this is a great danger and a great betrayal. But to the other thing, I'm very grateful that he's not our president, and that we do act as adults in this situation on this really, really, really small planet. And I do have a lot of hopes and expectations. And I can guarantee you, no one wants to surrender in Ukraine. No one will surrender, no matter how hard even our allies may try us to push that. And in the years to come, you will be grateful for that strength and resilience of Ukraine, because it can save a lot of lives in your countries, even across the ocean.
And Ukraine isn't going to surrender its language. It's not going to surrender its music. It's not going to surrender its food and its culture, and all the
And it's
things that make
military.
Ukraine
It's
Ukraine as
military.
well.
Not only this beautiful
Yeah,
poetic things, but also it's military, it's army, people, politicians, teachers. Not just like, because I don't want Ukraine to be treated as something beautiful that in exile, like Soviet Union was always talking about the beauty of our songs and the beauty of our dances. No, we will remain as a country, as the strongest country with the strongest army right now.
absolutely. It makes me think that if Western countries are not prepared to militarily defend, then would they be prepared to defend their history and their truth and all the things that people may associate with their national character? I think Ukraine demonstrates it's all or nothing. You have to be able to, willing to fight for everything. Um, Otherwise, it's all at risk. Anna, I'm very grateful to you for coming back on. It's always a pleasure. Um, we cover a lot of dark stuff. We cover a lot of lighter stuff of life as well. And I know the audience will be very grateful to what you do and the fact that you come back onto the channel every month, which is a tremendous pleasure.
Thank you so much. I love this tradition of ours, and I'm very grateful to you, Jonathan, for being the voice of the truth, for choosing this inconvenience of truth over the comfort of ignorance that many are unable to demonstrate now, and you're doing that persistently. So thank you so much for being a great friend of Ukraine, for being a great friend of the sane and adequate world, for being its voice.